Hello folks, welcome back to Grace Church and another episode of Views of Grace. I'm Vince Edwards and I'm delighted to spend some time with you and talk a bit about our building. We hope you've had a great Holy Week and Easter and we're able to see some of the worship services which we created virtually for you to enjoy at home this past week. It certainly was a strange and different Holy Week for us, but there were, I think, many blessings that happened and hope that you felt some of those. So this week we are in the Messiah Chapel. That's the short name. The official name is the Bishop Henshaw Chapel of the Messiah. And this chapel itself, the space, was created in 1912 when Ralph Adams Cram and his office designed and built the new chancel, which we toured a couple of weeks ago. So this was part of that project, though we think it didn't look exactly like this in 1912. We have the dedication here on the wall tells us that it's the Bishop Henshaw Memorial Chapel, erected in 1912. Bishop Henshaw was a rector of Grace Church who went on to be the Bishop of Rhode Island. And so this chapel was dedicated in his honor. So it was erected in 1912. We don't exactly know what the ceiling and the walls looked like. The paneling was here, but we're going to start by going up because what we know is the roof the ceiling and roof that we see now, the vaulting, the masonry walls, and the Reredos all were added in 1945. So, and I will say a bit later about what was originally here over the altar. We know that. I don't know what the walls looked like, and I don't know what the ceiling looked like. But in 1945, they created an actual vaulted ceiling. Looks like something, a bit of a Gothic vault. There are ribs, 4 ribs that lead to the middle. And if you look in the center, you see what we call a roof boss. We have one roof boss here at Grace Church, and that's it. This one's made of stone, and it's carved to look like a flower, and actually imitates some of the carving down here. So when they added this in 45, somebody was paying attention because they picked up some carving from the 1912 paneling. In the cathedrals of England and around Europe, they would have hundreds of these in the mini vaults over the nave or over the chancel or in the side aisles. Again, we have the one. You can see that the vault is made of individual, what almost look like subway tiles. There's a reason it looks that way. These tiles are Guastavino tiles. This was a method of building that was developed in the late 19th century by the Spanish engineer, architect, I think he was an architect, Rafael Guastavino. And he developed this method of building vaults using these tiles, individual tiles, getting the effect of a stone vault, but with much less support needed. So needless to say, it became very popular as Neo-Gothic movement was really popular in America. And if you've been to New York City, to the subway, anywhere you've been down in the subway, those subway tiles, which we now all put in our kitchens and bathrooms, they're called that because they're in the subways and they were developed by Guastavino. Grand Central, if you walk through the bowels of Grand Central, you see the marvelous Guastavino arches and vaults there, and many of the big churches in the city, of course, Riverside Church, St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, St. Bartholomew's, all made with Guastavino tile, some on the walls and most of the ceilings. So this was sort of up to the minute building at the time, a new thing. It was patented in 1892, I think. This would have gone in 1912. So this vault and the roof boss and this masonry added in 1945. Again, we're not sure what it looked like before that, but this is what it is now. We have one window in the chapel. This is not an exterior window. It actually goes into a stairwell that leads up to apartments. And you get a bit of natural light. You can see today we're getting a bit of light even on a cloudy day from the window across the stairwell. Why the window looks as it does, we don't know. I suspect that at some point during a project or a building project that some piece of equipment went through the window and they simply replaced it with the sort of frosted glass as opposed to trying to recreate the patterned glass. So I dream of getting on eBay and finding a perfectly sized window that's got some beautiful imagery in it that would replace that. But for now, that's our one stained glass window here in the chapel. Adds a little bit of natural light. So you come down, you see we have the masonry walls that looks like stone. A couple of stone pillars in the corner, leading down to this beautiful black walnut paneling. You couldn't get this today if you tried. And the black walnut paneling, I do think was original to 1912. and some of the carving is similar to what we saw in the chancel a few weeks ago. David's getting nice and close so you can see. These are also called bosses, not roof bosses, but simply bosses because they're on the vertical as opposed to the horizontal. And these are similar to some of the ones that were found on the choir stalls in the chancel, with the leaves and the grapes and the sort of tree of life, berries, grapes, not totally sure about that here, but vine-like and lifelike. And this wraps around the chapel, gives it a really warm contrast with the sort of cool gray stone above it. A lot of warmth comes from this beautiful woodwork. So then we're going to skip down. We'll skip the most obvious thing in the room for just a minute. Let's go to the altar because this was original in 1912. The altar is made of Hauteville marble. So the Hauteville marble, I'll just put this beautiful frontal out of the way for a moment. The Hauteville marble is this cool gray sort of putty colored marble with very little movement in it. Some carving done out of the marble, again, the tree of life. Here we have we have the wheat and the grapevine. So a Eucharistic motif of the bread and the wine. And then the altar has at its center a marvelous panel of sienna marble, which has lots of movement and color. And so we use on this altar, and most frequently on the high altar as well, we use what are called superfrontals, which means, it's kind of funny, they call them superfrontals. Super meaning, I suppose, above as opposed to great, because they're short. Because the altar has such beautiful work, we wouldn't want to hide that. So this again was original. Now above the altar, originally the paneling just continued around, and then above the paneling hung a painting. The painting is clearly not there now. It is still here in the church, and you'll see it on another tour. It was a copy of the Transfiguration of Jesus by Raphael. The 15th century, I think, painter. So we have two paintings, again we'll see on a different tour, but this was actually painted. So it was a sort of a popular thing to do, was to take one of the works of the masters, and then a really fine painter would paint a copy. So somebody gave this beautiful painting of the Transfiguration. That was the original sort of Reredos. In 1945, when the vault was added, the stone masonry, this marvelous Reredos was added. And it was carved by Ernest Pellegrini. Now you may remember his name because he also carved the triptych over the high altar. And if you just move these flowers out of the way, David can come in here. And we know it was Pellegrini because it says E. Pellegrini. He left his John Hancock right there for us to see. So this was about 16 years after he had carved the triptych over the high altar. And he died in 1955. So he was Boston-based and Italian sculptor, carver, did lots of work in churches. And it's really a marvelous piece in every way. It's sort of the height of Gothic. So you have the canopy at the top with a marvelous Gothic finial at the top that comes down to form the canopy with the Chi-Rho in the middle and the Alpha and the Omega. So the Chi-Rho is the cross and the sort of P-looking figure, and then the Alpha and the Omega you can see above Christ's body here. And then at the top, across the top, we have the four evangelists. We've talked about them before. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a little hard to see the detail, but John for sure is holding a quill and a book, being the sort of the original author, as we think of the Gospels. John, who said in the Gospel begins, in the beginning was the Word, so we associate the Word with him, and his symbol was the eagle, and that's why the eagle is often a lectern. We'll talk about that on another day too. And we'll jump down and come back. So again, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then if you jump all the way down, so we'll skip the middle for a minute, you can see that the symbols of these four evangelists are all the way down directly below them. So Matthew is there, and down here we have Matthew's symbol, which is the angel or winged man, winged person. And it actually says Matthew, in case you're confused. And then we have Mark next door, the winged lion. I love saying winged. And again, it tells us in case we're not sure. And then David can show you that we have Luke, which is the winged ox or bull. And then last, of course, is John with the eagle. So we have those evangelists and we have their symbols. And there's, I mentioned to you in the chancel that we had lots of places in the church where they occur, and there's still more to be seen in other places. So I won't try to go over every single thing, but if you can see, we have the hands of God, lots of wonderful floral carving, vines, grapes, flowers coming down. We have an open book, presumably the Bible, and then the thistle. We talked about the thistle up in the chancel, and so we have the thistle reoccurring here, and then a shell, which is associated, of course, with baptism. A bit of a sunburst, I suppose, with a fleur-de-lis there on that side. And then if we cross over, another hand at the top, and I believe, David, you can probably see with me too. I believe we have a butterfly at the very top there, and then below that is the hand, again presumably the hand of God. We're coming down through more flowers, vines, and then we come down to a font, another fleur-de-lis, some sunburst type flower, and then what I presume is a font here, which is directly across from the shell, so baptism, and then again the thistle. Just beautifully carved. And obviously the most prominent feature in the middle is the carved, very deep relief carved figure of Christ with open arms. And the cross and candlesticks on the altar are actually relatively new, the last few years. Very appropriate because they have Gothic finials, much like the top of the canopy. You can see these, so they fit nicely, but also chosen for their size because the cross stays just below Jesus's feet. So you can see his beautifully carved feet. We don't have a big cross blocking those. And then David, while you're here, if we can we'll zoom down here, we have some more of that wonderful groovy tile. We talked about the tiles in the chancel. These have really wonderful color. It's a little hard to see, but there's blue, there's green, these sort of arts and crafts tiles set amidst the marble floor. Really wonderful decoration. While we move out this way, I'll just say a little bit about the chapel itself is used for several things. Once a month, first Sunday of the month, we do healing prayers at the service, and those healing prayers take place here in the chapel. A bit of a private space, but yet open still, not too private. And then on Wednesdays, in non-coronavirus times, we have our Wednesday noon Eucharist here. And we set chairs here, and the congregation for that service sits out there, but the Eucharist is celebrated at this lovely altar. So the chapel certainly does get regular use. It's also a favorite spot when the church is open during the week and people come in to pray. This is often a place people like to go. And actually, David, that brings us to the rail where people might come and kneel. So I mentioned when we talked about the roof boss that you can find just about a little bit of everything at Grace Church in style. One really wonderful sort of Tudor effect is the linen fold paneling. You might have seen this in a Tudor manor house, like around the fireplace or something. So it actually, beautifully carved. It looks like linen that has been folded and layered. And so we have a bit of that on the rail. Still some Gothic carvings, again, some Gothic arches. Again, a favorite spot for people to come up and say a prayer. And while we're here, the kneelers are fascinating. When I first came to Grace, these kneelers were spread around in different places, and I didn't understand what they were. But then when you put them all together, you realize what we have here is a lunar eclipse. So I think it's the only time I've ever seen a lunar eclipse in a church. With various flowers, obviously holly here, some dogwood, some grapes, and some wheat. All things that have religious symbolism. And then I'll put this one down in the middle, David. This middle cushion that goes here when the gate is closed has the coat of arms for our Diocese of Rhode Island. So if the gate's closed, this is the effect here. Oh, actually, this is Grace Church, not the Diocese of Rhode Island. My mistake. 1829, which the church was founded. Yeah, Grace Church in Providence. with the Grace Church seal. We talked about the diocesan seal up in the chancel, but this is Grace Church's seal. So you could have a complete Eucharist here. And then, interestingly, David and I had to stop for just a moment when we started the video earlier because of a phone call. And while we were waiting to get started again, I noticed something I'd never seen. So as I told you, I learned as much as you do from these things. This is the credence table, beautifully carved, again with divine sort of imagery, really beautiful base, which almost nobody would see. And it has a Latin inscription around, which I had never noticed before today. So we looked it up. It's from Psalm 24, is that right, David? And the Latin says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And we'll try to get some close-up pictures of that to post with this. But it just wraps right around. Domini est terra et plenitudo eius. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So yeah, even I learned something today that I did not know before. The little font that's here really wasn't particularly for the Chapel of Messiah, but it was added by a rector in the 70s so that it could be moved around and baptism could be sort of wherever as opposed to having to go to a big heavy font. So we just keep it here in the corner of the Messiah Chapel, and in theory someone could have a baptism here in the chapel. And I think let's maybe just, if we just walk down, David, and just get you might want to give just sort of a full-on view. That'd be good. I'll check my notes and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. A really, really wonderful space. So next week, this is a good transition. Next week, we're going to talk about the crossing. We don't have transepts at Grace Church, but the area I'm standing in now is sort of known as the crossing. So this wonderful area here, this memorial, our lectern, the pulpit, the lovely sort of side chapel on the other side, the arch, the mural above the arch, these are all part of the crossing, and so that will be our installment for next week. So we hope you've enjoyed the tour of the Messiah Chapel, the Bishop Hinshaw Chapel of the Messiah. I don't think I actually said, this is huge. The reason it's called Messiah, we talked about Hinshaw, in 2006, when the Church of the Messiah from Olneyville joined Grace Church, became part of this congregation, the church decided that the Bishop Hinshaw Chapel should be called the Chapel of the Messiah, so that it's always remembered that Church of the Messiah is a huge part of who we are here and have their own dedicated part of the building. So we didn't get rid of Bishop Hinshaw, we added it, thus the long name, the Bishop Hinshaw Chapel of the Messiah. And it's a very special place, particularly for our Messiah friends who are now, of course, full parishioners and part of the life of Grace Church.